Hello and welcome to Miniature Adventures. I'm Big Lee, and this week I want to talk about logistics. Logistics. It is an established truth that wargamers talk about tactics, while professional soldiers know that battles are won by good logistics. We all know the expression, an army marches on its stomach, and it doesn't matter if it was Napoleon or Frederick the Great that said it. But it is the perfect summation of the importance of logistics to the fighting power of an army. Far more soldiers have been killed in history by starvation, exposure and disease than have ever been killed in combat, something that Napoleon no doubt knew very well indeed, especially after Russia. The ability to resupply and support an army in the field is as important as the ability of that army to beat its enemy in a martial feat of arms. But logistics rarely makes its way onto the war games table. Now, why is that? And is it a missed opportunity? So when I was a very young child, many years ago, playing with my Airfix toy soldiers on the living room floor, I certainly wasn't calculating and planning supply routes in my young head. Like similar boys of my age, I was the dashing commander, the hero of every war movie, the great general. But the truth is, none of these characters have their moment of glory if the flow of beans, bombs and bullets is interrupted. Victory is as much about the effectiveness of the general staff and that rear echelon as it is about the commander. So how do we represent this at a tactical level in our war games? And also how can we represent this in our games in general? And if it is even appropriate to do so for all types of tabletop warfare? Now, the scale of the battle being played and the time span represented are an important factor, I think, in deciding if there is a role for logistics on the games table. So most skirmish games, for instance, will typically represent a small body of troops involved in just a few minutes of intense combat. It is therefore arguable that these sort of encounters won't be suitable for representing supply and lines of communication. So, for example, if a platoon or a squad find themselves being drawn into an encounter with insufficient ammunition, they're just likely to withdraw before the fighting even starts. And unless the scenario is specifically about supply, then the victory conditions will likely just focus on the limited objectives or casualties, rather than if the men get their rations and a brew up. Take the game up a notch to a company or regimental level, and these larger battles may represent several hours of combat. Now you have a real opportunity for the most heavily engaged units to actually run out of ammunition. And fatigue and morale can of course be affected by hunger and thirst and tired soldiers, as well as whether they have enough bullets. So these games may have much more opportunity for resupply to play a greater part in a unit's ability to keep fighting and remain effective. This can be represented by physically resupplying a unit, such as moving a supply vehicle into contact with the asset being served. Stuart in the Shed of War uses this feature a lot in his games, with supply vehicles feeding ammunition to artillery units. However, representing resupply could just be as simple as being able to draw an uncontested line of supply back to their baseline or main line of communication, such as a road. Either option works as a means of making logistical concerns a part of the player's decision making. The representation of logistics on the games table really comes into play when we have operational level games, which cover several days and the movement of divisions and corps rather than individual regiments. You're more likely to encounter that sort of game perhaps as a board game, from the likes of Avalon Hill, for instance. Examples like Rise and Decline of the Third Reich or Paths of Glory will have multiple mechanics to represent the importance of supply, but also provide opportunities for a player to interfere with the enemy's lines of supply. So, having discussed the possibilities for rules to include some element of logistics, resupply and lines of communication, what are your favourite examples from the rules that you play? Is there a particular rule mechanic that you really like, that you feel encapsulates the dilemma of maintaining supply to units in the field? And for that matter, are there any rules where you think that the author has tried to incorporate logistics into a game but hasn't quite got the mechanic right? As always, I'd be really interested to hear your views and experiences in the comments below. So time for a hobby update. The second half of my review of the product sent to me by Whip Games and Miniatures went out on Friday. This was a look at the new 28mm Ancient Greeks, which went on sale at the end of January, but they also sent me some 10mm figures for ranges which I assume are going to come out in due course. The guys seemed pleased with the videos that I've done, which is great, but I also learned a lot from doing this. I mean, I wasn't 100% happy with how the models looked on my homemade display frame, and the angle at which I filmed them made them look much bigger than they actually were compared to the ruler that I was using to show their size. So I've just gone out and bought myself a load of materials and made myself a slightly different frame, and I can stand the models on there, and I've got much more accurate, and it even stands up. The idea being is I will actually put some models on here for display. You'll see that in future videos, no doubt. I like these little tinkery things where I go, I need to find a solution to this, and that was just one of those things. That kept me occupied for an hour or so at the weekend. Talking of the weekend, last Sunday 6 members of the Rejects got together for a really big Napoleonic game set in 1814. Stuart really outdid himself with this game, and even though I was on the losing side, I have to say I had a thoroughly good time playing the game. By the end of the last turn there had been hand-to-hand combat along the entire length of the line. With Stuart, when Stuart tallied up the victory points, the French had won a clear victory, but I think everyone agreed that it felt much closer than that, and that was a good thing because we all really enjoyed the tension towards the end of the game. I've put together a quick battle report with some of my photographs on my blog earlier in the week, so please go over there if you want to see some more photos of the game and a fuller write-up, and I'll put a description of that in the comments, but in the description box below. So this weekend I'm heading down to Dorset and the Tank Museum at Botherton. The Southwest Model Show is taking place in the museum, and I've been wanting to go and see this show for a very long time. Indeed, I was supposed to go in October, but of course I was unable to attend because my leg was playing up. I was off sick for a long time. So fortunately I was able to move the hotel booking, and I was able to get the tickets. The tickets for the museum are still valid, so we were able to delay the whole thing until the next incarnation of the event this weekend. So as anyone knows me will know that the Tank Museum is one of my top favourite museums. It's arguably the best armour collection in the world, and it's constantly reinventing its displays to keep its exhibits fresh and interesting. I'm actually going to the Tank Museum twice this year, lucky me, as my son-in-law and I have booked tickets for Tankfest back in, later on in July. This huge living history event will see lots of historic vehicles driving around the arena, kicking up dust and exciting the crowds. I'll be filming some of the weekend and the show, of course. I fully plan to film at Tankfest as well later in the year, and of course I'll put those videos here on the channel for you to see. So Workbench update, I've been working hard this week to try and finish those 1200th scale ships that I mentioned earlier in the week. I'm away for a few days now, and I really wanted to get these done and dusted so I could start something new when I came back. They're finished painted, they're based, but I'm just trying to do the rigging right now. And what I have to say is, one thing I have learned is that putting rigging on ships that small requires a lot of patience, a very steady hand, and it turns you into a sailor, because I have never sworn so much in my entire life. I've been trying to keep the rigging as simple as possible, so we're putting the main guy ropes on and a couple of stays. I'm not doing rat lines or anything like that, so I'm sure there will be people out there who love this period and these sort of scale ships who do much more detail. I'm putting the basics on. I'm hoping that will be enough. On the first few that I've done, I'm quite happy with the way they've turned out. The rest of the group have also been doing, attempting to do some rigging. By the way, I'm using some cotton for the longer ropes, and the bristles off of a brush, nice and simple, and a bit of super glue. And as I say, you need a steady hand to do it. But I've managed to get them done. I've got the last couple of ships to do. As I say, I filmed this a few days before the weekend away, so I'm hoping I got them all finished before I left this morning. Now, waiting in the wings, or in fact over there, are some more 6mm medieval buildings from Slug Industries. There's some cracking buildings in this new batch. They're actually from the first Kickstarter, which I missed, so I've bought a box of those, and I'm really looking forward to getting stuck into those after my weekend away. One thing at a time though. So I've got time for a very quick book review. With my trip to Botherton coming up, I couldn't resist dipping back into a book on tanks and their crews that I read many years ago and found both interesting and very enlightening. So let me start this review with a warning that Tank Men, the human story of the tanks at war, is definitely not for the faint-hearted. Robert Kershaw has collected together hundreds of veteran stories and connected them in a hard-edged narrative that takes the reader from the first tanks of World War I through to the end of the Second World War. By the conclusion of this book, there's little doubt that life in a tank for crewmen could be uncomfortable, brutal, and above all very, very dangerous. In the early days of the tank corps, these great metal boxes were hailed and derided in equal measure. Seen as a war-winning weapon, Britain led the world in tank innovation and design. But in the early days, the tank was seen as a temporary weapon with no practical future. Cavalry regiments sternly resisted the move to mechanisation, and the High Command and policymakers, it has to be said, struggled to decide how best to use this new weapon. Linking into a different book I read, Peter Beale's Death by Design, made it absolutely clear that this lack of focus during the interwar years, combined with post-war budget cuts, saw Britain lose its leading edge, is the best way of putting it. Tank design was confused, contradictory, slow-paced and misdirected. The result was that when war reached these shores again in 1939, Britain was ill-equipped to face the Panzer divisions of Nazi Germany. This was as much a failure of tactical employment of tanks as it was the hardware, but also the results of the political motivation, like I say, in the interwar years. The armoured box of the tank became the coffin of many a crew on both sides. Now, many of the veteran accounts collected by Kershaw have power to shock the reader, even those familiar with other books on tank warfare. This is a history told by those that lived it, and it is a stark and uncompromising window on the horrors and hardships of war. This is the first book I've read in which I felt I understood, at least in part, what it was like to be a crewman in one of our tanks. The description of conditions in the desert campaign in North Africa particularly leave the reader in little doubt that the men and machines were pushed beyond all reasonable limits and expectations in that environment. One of the things I most liked about this book was the breadth and range of veterans whose stories filled the pages. The majority are former Allied servicemen, but there was also a good selection of accounts from the other side of the conflict. Some of these come from letters and diaries, but a good number are from interviews with, at the time, surviving combatants. And it's clear that whichever side you fought on, tank crews in every uniform shared similar hardships and fears, primarily amongst these the fear of fire inside the tank. This is one of those standout books that I think deserves to be seen on the shelves of anyone interested in armoured warfare. So that's it for this week. I'm going to get back and try and finish my rigging without going completely insane. If you enjoyed today's video, please join the conversation in the comments below, and of course please like, subscribe and share. And if you want to keep up to date with weekly content from the channel, please tap the bell notification icon. So until next week, stay safe, keep gaming and of course keep rolling high.